All right, thank you. My name is Catherine Harris, and my master's thesis for the Evergreen State College is Vegetation Recruitment Assessment on gravel shadows of engineered log jams in the Lower Satsop River after a single hydraulic cycle. Sorry, the arrows are sometimes working, sometimes not. Okay, so the larger engineered logjam project area was put in place by the Lower Satsop Restoration and Protection Program. And engineered logjams were installed to reduce erosion and improve salmon habitat. And the erosion areas are highlighted in red on this graphic put together by the LSRPP. You can see that the erosion areas butt up against agricultural land and also infrastructure such as Keys Road. And then I highlighted my study site with a gold star there. So this is an aerial photo of my study site looking downstream. You can see the farmland that's already been eroded downstream that these log jams are going to divert the river away from. And here on River Right are two apex log jams. These are large log jams with usually one or two trees, like boles is what they're called, and then smaller logs all put together or accumulated over time. And these trap a lot of sediment, including sediment on the gravel shadows behind the log jams, and create pools through scouring, which is really good for salmon habitat. And then there's also floodplain roughness structures, such as this one, where there's one structure followed by others that curve. So in this case, it's curving in the direction that they want the river to flow in. And so the river should hopefully go in that direction during flooding events. And then there's a naturally accruing log jams as well. So my research questions were over the first summer growing season, what vegetation will colonize on newly formed gravel shadows behind engineered log jams, and how many species will be present, and what will be the percent cover in vegetation health, and does substrate type make a difference in any of these parameters? So this is my study site from another aerial image. These images were taken by drones by Mike Ruth, and this was manipulated in ArcGIS Pro. So again, you can see the apex log jams and then the floodplain roughness structure. So vegetation data was collected on these 3 engineered log jams and 1 natural log jam. The natural log jam was chosen just because I could walk to it, and it was good to see if there were any stark differences between engineered log jam vegetation and natural log jams. So data was collected for 11 straight weeks, every Friday from June 18th to August 27th, 2021. And a transect line was placed on the length of each gravel shadow, where quadrats were randomly placed on either side every 10 feet. And the data collected in each quadrat included the number of species present, species identified, percent vegetation cover, and substrate type and vegetation health. And we also used a GPS Trimble device to map out the quadrat locations. So I was able to put that on the GIS photo as well, and depict that with the yellow dots on the right. All the gravel shadows had 18 quadrats except for FR1, which had 22 because the gravel shadow was longer. And this photo on the left is the quadrat that I used. It was 2 feet by 2 feet. And every week I put the flag marker in the left-hand corner, so it was always in the same spot after the first week. And then just some methods for substrate type and vegetation health. I wanted to show the different size classifications for substrate. There were 6, and Each type was recorded just on the first week and assumed to be unchanging over the summer because there was no flooding events. But each quadrat could have had several of these, like fine, gravel fine, and cobble, for example. And then for vegetation health, the index was from 1 to 5, 1 being near death and 5 being excellent. And only 1 value was given for each quadrat, but it was recorded each week. So for substrate results, I had to combine some of the substrate categories because like there weren't enough quadrats that just had cobble. So I had to combine the gravel types and cobble into this, I said G/C, and then fine and sand. And from there, made combinations of each of those. So combination 1 had like any combo with fines, and then combo 2 had no fines, and combo 3 had no fine or sand. And from there, you can see on average, A1 had the coarsest array of substrate because it has a 2 as the mean. And then N1 had the finest array because it didn't even have any combination 3s in any of the quadrats. For percent cover results, the top table is it averages all 11 weeks. And so you can see that A2 has the highest mean or highest percent cover overall. But I also broke it down in this table or figure showing the first and last weeks. And you can really see how much higher the percent vegetation cover was for A2. And then it's similar for vegetation health. For all 11 weeks, A2 was also the healthiest, the highest vegetation health. And then broken down from first and last week, you can see that each gravel shadow started out with either excellent or good health. And then all gravel shadows declined in health, but A2 was, it declined far less than the others. And then for analysis using RStudio, I looked at percent cover, vegetation health, and substrate, and they each had significant results. But to compare and see which gravel shadows were different from, or significantly different from each other, I did pairwise comparison tests. So for percent cover, A2 was significantly different than FR1 and N1. For vegetation health, A2 was significantly different from all other gravel shadows. And then for substrate, A1 and N1 were significantly different. So Sitka willow is a native plant on the Lower Satsop River, and the populations of Sitka willow that established, especially on A1 and A2, were pretty surprising. It was a lot of Sitka willow carpeting some of these gravel shadows. So I also showed week 1 and week 11, and you can see how much ended up establishing on A2 by the final week. Other factors observed to affect vegetation that were not measured were moisture levels, elevation of gravel shadows, and a heat wave around week 3, where temperatures reached over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And with the moisture levels, A2 was inundated on the first week, like in this top photo. And by the last week, water had receded and vegetation colonized. I'm showing this aerial photo again because even though it's later in the season, this area is where the river backflowed onto the gravel shadow. So this is exposed now, but on week 1, the river was flowing in, and by week 3, this was exposed and cut off. So the gravel shadow slowly receded. So I also did generalized linear mixed effects modeling to allow for random variables to be included, because I wanted to use Sitka willow presence as a response variable. So I did that, and the independent variables were substrate type and distance from the logjam as fixed variables and site as a random variable. And by using site, that allowed for the differences across site, like moisture content and elevation, to be included as factors affecting Sitka willow presence. And once we had several models from the GLMM and ICACE information criterion was performed to find the best supported model. And the AIC explains the greatest amount of variation using the smallest number of independent variables. And the highest AIC weight depicts the best supported model. So I highlighted that in yellow. And you can see that the two models with the highest AIC weight both had site as in the random factor, but also some of the fixed effects variables that were collected for this project, showing that those also influenced willow presence, because the model with only site had no weight in the AIC model. So the inundation or continual moisture of A1 and A2 likely allowed for Sitka willow to successfully germinate in great numbers. But substrate was also another factor, because coarse sediments have larger pore spaces that can drain water, while fine sediments tend to have more moisture availability and nutrients. And the A2 gravel shadow had an average array of fine sediments. So the high number of germinated willow seedlings were likely aided by a combination of moisture availability, nutrient availability, and fine sediments. And even though N1 had the finest sediments overall, it was pretty far away from the river, so it didn't have a sustained moisture level over the summer, and the heat wave and possibly low nutrients likely led to the low vegetation numbers on that gravel shadow. So engineered log jams are typically installed with the goal of improving channel complexity, erosion control, or increasing salmon habitat. In this case, like the scouring and creating pools behind the log jam. But from this study, you can see that if you place an engineered log jam, so the river might inundate or provide moisture over the summer, you could provide ideal conditions for native plant species like willow or cottonwood. And this has the potential to further improve salmon habitat by providing shade and habitat for terrestrial and aquatic species, because the gravel shadow is in the middle of the river. And strong root structures from willow could also stabilize gravel shadows and improve the longevity of installed log jams. But further research needs to be done, because vegetation isn't usually measured when looking at the effectiveness of installed log jams. But there's a lot of different factors that go into installing log jams, and the type of river system they're on, especially, or the location of the log jam, seed sources from native or invasive plants, surrounding infrastructure near the river, flooding or droughts. There's a lot of things that need to be taken into account. And so the more research that could be done, you could perhaps find some similarities between rivers. And then here's my acknowledgements. I'll just leave this up to read and answer questions in a minute. We're just going to stop recording.
Questions first. Good question first. Good question. There's a